The road stretched like a ribbon of rust-colored dust beneath a sky that seemed too big for one man's thoughts. I'd been driving for hours, chasing the horizon the way people chase silence when their heads are too full of noise. The old pickup groaned with each mile, the dashboard light flickering like a tired heartbeat. I didn't have a destination, just a vague idea that somewhere past the city, past all the buzzing neon and late-night calls I didn't want to answer, I might find a piece of myself again. The air was dry and still. A few tumbleweeds rolled across the empty expanse, their shadows long and thin in the fading sunlight. Country radio had long given up trying to find a signal. All I had left was the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing. It wasn't until the truck started to cough that I realized how far I'd gone without paying attention. The wheel jerked as the engine sputtered, coughed again, and died altogether. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that presses on your ears. I turned the key once, twice. Nothing. Not even the sad click of a battery trying to care. I sat there a while, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the endless line of road ahead. I could feel frustration creeping in, but beneath it was something softer. Resignation. Maybe it was fitting, I thought, for everything in my life to stop in the middle of nowhere. When I stepped out, the heat hit me like a wall. The wind carried the smell of dry grass and old earth. I popped the hood even though I knew I wouldn't find much. The engine looked like it had given up years ago, just like me. I checked my phone, no bars. Not even a flicker. The nearest town had been 50 miles back, if I remembered right, and the map said there was nothing ahead for at least another 70. Great, I muttered, slamming the hood shut. The sound echoed into the emptiness. For a while, I just sat on the hood, watching the sun bleed orange across the horizon. The loneliness out here was different. In the city, loneliness had faces, noise, distractions. Out here, it was pure, raw and quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. I started to think maybe I'd just spend the night in the truck. Then, faintly at first, I heard it, the rhythmic thud of hooves against dirt. It was so out of place it almost sounded like a memory. I stood, shading my eyes against the low sun. A figure appeared on the rise, a silhouette framed in gold. A horse, and a rider. He came closer slowly, his posture straight and steady, reins held loosely in one hand. Dust clung to his jeans, his boots, his hat brim. His face was shaded, but his voice carried easily when he called out, "You all right there, stranger?" I hesitated before answering. Something about his calmness disarmed me. "Truck died on me," I said. "Guess I'm not as close to civilization as I thought." He guided the horse closer until I could see the quiet confidence in his eyes. Pale blue, the kind that noticed everything but didn't say too much about it. Not many folks take this road unless they've got a reason. "Guess I was just trying to get lost," I said, half a joke, half a confession, that earned a small smile. "Well, you picked the right place for that. Closest phone's 10 miles back my way. Got a ranch out that direction. You're welcome to ride with me. Get a warm meal and a call out if you need it." He said it so simply, like offering help to a stranger on an empty road was just another part of the day. I looked at the horse, at the long trail disappearing into the distance. Then back at the truck. Useless, stubborn, just like its owner. "I don't want to trouble you," I said. "It's no trouble," he replied. "I wouldn't leave a man out here alone with night coming." His tone wasn't commanding, but it carried a kind of steady weight that made you want to trust him. Still, pride made me stall. "You don't even know me," he shrugged. "Don't need to. You look like someone who could use a ride more than I could use an extra saddle." I couldn't help a small laugh at that. There was something about his easy humor that made the edges of my nerves loosen. "All right," I said finally. "Guess I don't have much choice." He nodded once, satisfied, then swung down from his horse in one smooth motion. Up close, I could see the strength in the way he moved, deliberate, sure, unhurried. He offered his hand, rough and warm. "Name's Cole," he said. I shook it, feeling the faint tremor of my own exhaustion. I paused, realizing how long it had been since I'd introduced myself to anyone. "Evan." "Good to meet you, Evan." Come on, then. He guided the horse closer and handed me the reins. She's gentle. You'll sit up front. I'll keep her steady from behind. It wasn't the first time I'd been offered help, but it was the first time in a long while that I actually wanted to accept it. As I climbed into the saddle, the leather creaked under me. The horse shifted, muscles rippling beneath my legs. I felt Cole settle in behind me, the warmth of him close, the reins brushing against my hand as he took them. You ready? He asked quietly. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. Then let's go home. We started forward at a slow trot, the sound of hooves filling the silence the truck had left behind. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in burnt orange and deep rose. I could feel the steady rhythm of the horse beneath us, the strength in Cole's presence just behind me, guiding. For the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. The road might have gone quiet, but something else had started to speak. Soft, wordless, and unexpected. And though I didn't know it yet, that simple offer of a ride would change everything about the way I understood being found. The horse shifted beneath us, impatient to move, her breath puffing small clouds of dust into the cooling evening air. I wasn't used to sitting on a saddle, certainly not with another person behind me, but Cole's calm confidence made it seem simple. He adjusted the reins, his arm brushing mine in the process. Just lean with her movement, he said softly, his voice steady and warm near my ear. She'll do the work if you let her. Easier said than done. The leather creaked as the horse started forward, a slow rhythm at first that soon settled into something steady and hypnotic. Cole's chest brushed against my back every time the horse lifted her stride, and though he wasn't touching me intentionally, the closeness felt almost intimate in the stillness of the dusk. I told myself to focus on the horizon, but my senses had other plans. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the faint scent of hay and cedar soap clinging to his shirt, the sound of his quiet breathing behind me. It should have been uncomfortable, but somehow it wasn't, not after a few minutes. Been a while since I had company on a ride, he said after a while. I guess I'm not much of a talker, I replied. Don't need to be. His tone carried no judgment, only observation. Silence don't bother me. Most folks talk just to fill it, but silence tells you plenty. We rode a little longer without speaking. The sun was now sinking low, turning the world to shades of copper and violet. Every so often, I'd glance at the endless stretch of fence line or the low hills that framed the horizon, and I found myself breathing easier than I had all week. Cole finally broke the silence again. So what sent you out this way? Most people from the city don't drive down roads that don't lead anywhere. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Just needed to get away for a bit, I said. Things got crowded. Crowded how? I hesitated. I didn't owe him an explanation, but something about the quiet between us made it feel okay to speak. Job ended. Relationship ended. Apartment felt smaller by the day. So I just kept driving until I didn't have to think. He let out a small hum, thoughtful. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to start over. I glanced back slightly, catching his profile in the fading light. Strong jaw, focused eyes that seemed older than his face. You sound like a man who's been lost before. That earned the faintest chuckle. Maybe once or twice. Difference is, I stayed where I ended up. His horse slowed as the road curved through a narrow pass lined with cottonwoods. Their leaves whispered overhead, filling the space between our words. You got a ranch out here all by yourself? I asked. Yeah, he said. Was my folks' place. They passed a few years back. Guess I figured if I kept the work going, maybe the quiet wouldn't feel so heavy. There was no self-pity in his tone, just plain honesty. I liked that about him already. We fell silent again, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind anymore. Every time the horse shifted, I could feel the faint press of his leg against mine, the subtle adjustment of his hand guiding the reins. The rhythm of our movement seemed to sync, the steady breathing of the horse, the rustle of Cole's jacket brushing my shoulder, the heartbeat I could almost feel through the space between us. Sorry if I'm riding stiff, I said finally. Not used to sharing transportation. He laughed softly, a deep, rich sound that melted into the dusk. You're doing fine. I've had worse passengers. Worse. Had a city kid once who screamed every time the horse sneezed. I thought he was gonna jump clean off. That made me laugh. Really laugh the first time in what felt like months. The sound surprised me as much as it did him. See, Cole said gently. Ain't all bad out here. We rode on as the sky turned a darker blue, dotted with the first stars. I started to notice little things I'd missed before. The cool brush of wind on my face, the faint chirp of crickets, the earthy smell of dry grass mixed with saddle leather. It was grounding in a way that no city skyline had ever been. You quieted down, Cole said after a bit. Not as a question but an observation. I think I forgot what quiet feels like, I said. He nodded, though I couldn't see it. You'll remember. Out here, silence teaches you things. For the next stretch, there wasn't a word between us. I could feel his steady presence behind me, his hands sure on the reins, his breath warm against the back of my neck. What started as awkwardness began to feel like something else. Comfort, maybe. Trust. After a while, lights appeared in the distance. Dim, yellow glows scattered like stars across the ground. That your ranch? I asked. Yeah, he said. We'll be there soon. You did good for your first ride. Guess I had a good teacher, I said quietly. He didn't respond, but I caught the small curve of a smile when I glanced back. As we descended the last hill, the view opened up. The ranch spread below us. Wooden fences, a small barn, the faint glow of light spilling from a window. Smoke rose from a chimney, the smell of something faintly sweet. Maybe bread, maybe coffee, carried on the wind. For a man who had spent the last few weeks trying to escape everything, I suddenly felt like I'd arrived somewhere I didn't know I'd been heading toward. Cole slowed the horse to a gentle walk as we entered the yard. He reached forward, his hand brushing my shoulder as he steadied the reins. Easy now, he murmured, to the horse, maybe? But something about the softness of his tone made my pulse jump anyway. When he helped me down, his hand lingered just a second longer than necessary. Not enough to be forward, but enough to be felt. Thank you, I said, turning to meet his gaze. He tipped his hat slightly. You don't have to thank me, Evan. Sometimes the road just brings folks where they're meant to be. The words sank deeper than I expected. I didn't know what he meant exactly, or if he even knew. But when I looked at him standing there in the quiet yard, with the starlight washing over his shoulders and that patient kindness in his eyes, something inside me, something I'd kept locked tight, shifted just a little. Maybe trust didn't always begin with words. Maybe sometimes it started with a ride through the dark and a stranger who knew how to listen. The yard smelled of hay and earth, sweet and clean. The last of the sunlight caught on the tin roof of the barn as Cole led the horse into the small corral. I followed behind, my boots crunching over dry gravel. The place wasn't large, but it felt alive in a quiet, working way. Fences mended by steady hands, tools lined up where they belonged, a windmill creaking in the distance. Inside the house, everything was wood and warmth. The door hinges squeaked when Cole pushed it open. It ain't much, he said, hanging his hat by the doorway. But it keeps the cold out. I stepped in, surprised by how homey it was. The floorboards creaked beneath my boots, and the faint scent of coffee and old pine filled the air. A single oil lamp sat on the table beside a few books and a coiled lasso. On the far wall hung a faded photograph of two men and a woman. His parents, I guessed. It's perfect, I said, meaning it. Feels real. He smiled at that. Well, it's honest, I'll give it that. Cole moved to the small kitchen, lighting another lantern. Its glow spread across the counters, casting long, warm shadows. You sit, he said, gesturing to the table. I'll rustle up something. Bet you haven't eaten since morning. I can help, I offered, but he waved me off. Guest doesn't lift a finger. House rule. I sat anyway, my hands wrapped around the mug of water he poured. Watching him move about the kitchen was oddly calming. Each motion practiced, unhurried. He diced onions and potatoes with a small pocket knife, humming under his breath, the kind of half-tune people used to keep from thinking too much. Used to cook for a crew back when we had ranch hands. he said over his shoulder. Now it's just me. Guess old habits stick. What happened to the hands? I asked. Times got tight, he said simply. Couldn't keep everyone on. Didn't want to, truth be told. I like the quiet. Something in his tone told me the quiet hadn't always liked him back. By the time the stew was done, night had settled over the plains, and the world outside the window was nothing but darkness and the sound of distant cattle calling to one another. The table between us glowed softly under the lantern, steam rising from our bowls. It wasn't a fancy meal, just potatoes, beans, and a few chunks of meat, but it tasted better than anything I'd had in months. Maybe it was the company. Maybe it was the silence that didn't demand to be filled. So, he said after a few minutes of quiet eating, city life. You planning on heading back once that truck's fixed? I shrugged. Don't know yet. Guess I haven't thought that far ahead. He nodded, studying me with those steady eyes of his. Sometimes not thinking too far ahead is the best way to breathe again. His words sank deeper than I expected. I didn't reply right away, afraid my voice might crack. We ate in companionable silence for a while longer. When the dishes were cleared, Cole poured us each a bit of coffee from a battered tin pot. The rich, bitter smell filled the room. Under the warm flicker of the lantern, conversation started to flow easier. He asked about the city, the noise, the people, the pace, and I asked about the ranch, the horses, the endless fields. He told me he'd been riding since he was 8, that his father had taught him everything he knew. He was a hard man, Cole said, leaning back in his chair. Didn't say much, but he believed in doing right. Mom was softer, said silence could be kindness or cruelty, depending on what you do with it. I smiled faintly. Guess you took a little of both from them. He laughed. A low, easy sound that made the room feel even smaller and warmer. Maybe so. Never thought about it like that. For a while, we talked about everything and nothing. About small things that somehow mattered. How he could read weather by the smell of the wind. How I once got lost in a subway station and swore I'd never use public transit again. We laughed, and it wasn't forced. It was the kind that comes when loneliness finally finds someone to share the joke. When the laughter faded, the quiet that followed wasn't empty. It felt like an understanding settling between us, soft and steady. Cole's gaze lingered on me longer than before. Truth is, he said, voice low, I don't get much company out here. Don't go to town often. Most days, it's just me and the horses. I could hear what he wasn't saying, that solitude could be both a comfort and a cage. I get that, I said quietly. Sometimes being alone feels safe, until it doesn't. He nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting in a faint smile. You've been there, huh? Still am, I admitted. For a long moment we didn't speak. The lamp flickered, and the faint hum of the night insects filled the space between us. Something unspoken shifted then, like two people realizing they'd been standing in the same darkness without ever knowing it. When Cole stood, the chair creaked beneath him. You must be tired. Been a long day. Yeah, I said, though I wasn't sure I wanted the evening to end. There's only one bedroom, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, almost sheepishly. Bed's big enough for 2, but I can take the couch if you'd rather have the room. The offer was simple, but the hesitation behind it was not. He meant it as courtesy, but I could see the faint flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Like he didn't want to push, but didn't want to be alone, either. You've done enough, I said gently. I can take the couch. He shook his head. Ain't happening. My guest sleeps in the bed. The warmth of his stubborn kindness made me smile. Then how about we share? I promise I don't snore. He froze for half a second, then chuckled softly. You sure? Yeah, I said. It's just a bed, right? But we both knew it wasn't just that. Not entirely. He nodded finally. All right then. The bedroom was small, lit only by moonlight through the thin curtains. The bed creaked when we sat down, the scent of clean sheets and wood smoke surrounding us. Cole lay on his side, back turned respectfully, giving me space. The silence between us was different now. Not heavy, not awkward, but full of something unnamed. I stared up at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the ranch, the wind brushing against the siding, the quiet shuffle of horses in their stalls, the slow rhythm of his breathing beside me. Somewhere in that silence, I felt a strange kind of peace. Maybe it was because I knew, without either of us saying a word, that something gentle had begun here, something that didn't need to be rushed or labeled. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I felt like I'd finally arrived. The room had long since gone quiet, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay there, half turned toward the window, watching the thin slice of moonlight stretch across the floorboards. The sounds of the ranch drifted in faintly through the open window, the creak of the barn settling, the far-off call of a night bird, the soft whicker of horses somewhere in the dark. It was peaceful, yet my chest felt heavy, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. Cole had gone to wash up after we turned in, and I could still hear him moving somewhere down the hallway. The faint clink of a cup, the soft murmur of a door closing. Each sound felt deliberate, as if he was giving me time to settle before returning. When he finally stepped back into the room, I didn't move. He walked quietly, his boots in his hand, his steps careful on the old floorboards. I felt the bed dip slightly as he lay down on the far side, careful to leave a space between us. For a while, the silence hung there, thick but not uncomfortable, just heavy with everything neither of us dared say. I could feel his presence behind me. His breathing was steady, slow. I told myself to close my eyes, to rest, but my thoughts refused to quiet. Every memory from the last few months flooded in. Failure, loneliness, the constant noise of a life that had stopped fitting. I had thought I wanted solitude, but lying here, hearing another person's breathing in the dark, I realized I had been starved for this. Quiet company that didn't demand, didn't take, just existed beside me. At some point, I must have shifted, because the bed springs creaked and his breath hitched slightly. Then came the softest touch, a hand brushing against my shoulder, tentative, almost like a question. I froze, not in fear, but in surprise. The warmth of that single touch spread through me in a way I hadn't expected. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice rough in the darkness. "Didn't mean to startle you." I turned slowly, the moonlight catching the side of his face. His expression wasn't bold or assuming. It was hesitant, almost ashamed. His hand lingered just above the sheet, caught between retreating and reaching out again. "It's okay," I said softly. "You didn't." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet seemed to hum with all the things we didn't have words for. Then he sighed, his voice low. "I forget how long it's been since someone else was here," he said. "Not just to help fix something, but to stay, to talk, to fill the house with a sound other than wind." I swallowed. "I get that. I didn't think anyone could miss noise until I lost the right kind of it." He smiled faintly, the curve of it small but real. "The right kind," he repeated. "That's it, isn't it?" His hand found mine under the covers, not bold, not searching, just steady. I didn't pull away. The warmth was grounding, a reminder that I wasn't invisible. "I didn't mean to make things awkward," he said quietly. "It's just, sometimes I don't realize how alone I've gotten until someone's near again." "You didn't," I said. "You've been nothing but kind." He looked at me then, really looked. "You seemed like a man running from something. I figured maybe you needed the quiet. But now I'm wondering if maybe you just needed someone to listen." His words hit something raw in me. I could have looked away, but I didn't. "I didn't know what I needed," I admitted. "I just knew I couldn't keep staying where I was. It felt like the walls were closing in, and the only way out was anywhere else." Cole nodded slowly. "I know that feeling." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of shared understanding. Two people who'd been carrying their own silences for too long. He shifted slightly, propping himself up on one elbow. "You ever feel like you're not supposed to want what you want? Like there's some rule everyone else knows, and you keep breaking it just by breathing?" I met his eyes. "All the time." He let out a breath, almost a laugh, but it trembled. "Yeah, me too." The admission hung there, unforced and honest. I didn't ask him to explain. It was enough to hear it, to feel it resonate somewhere deep in the places I'd been trying to hide. Without thinking, I turned my hand over, lacing my fingers with his. His skin was rough, calloused, warm. "I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to be seen," I said quietly, "even if the world doesn't understand it." Cole stared at me for a long time, eyes glinting faintly in the low light. "You sound like you've thought about that a lot." "Too much," I said, "and not enough." He smiled again, soft, sad, and grateful all at once. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't," I said, "but maybe it could be if we let it." He nodded, his thumb brushing absently against my palm. For a while we just stayed like that, breathing in rhythm. The stillness around us didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt protective, like the night itself was holding space for us to exist without explanation. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You ever wonder if maybe the things we're told to fear aren't wrong? Just misunderstood?" I looked at him, really looked, and saw what he meant. Not just the loneliness, but the quiet longing to be known without judgment. "I think," I said slowly, "we spend so much time trying not to be who we are that we forget what it feels like to just be." He didn't answer. Instead, he moved closer, slowly, as if asking permission with every inch. When his forehead came to rest against mine, the world seemed to stop. There was no rush, no need for words or movement, just two people breathing the same air, finding comfort in proximity. It wasn't about desire, it was about relief. I felt his hand move to my shoulder again, steady, reassuring. His voice came soft in the dark. "You're safe here. You don't have to explain a thing." Neither did he. When I finally closed my eyes, I felt his fingers brush the back of my hand once more before settling there. The weight was light but sure. Outside, the wind shifted, and somewhere in the distance a horse snorted in its stall. The house creaked like it too was breathing easier. I thought of how strange it was that a broken truck could lead me to this moment, to warmth, to stillness, to being seen. And when sleep finally found me, it wasn't the restless kind I'd known before. It was the kind that comes when you're finally allowed to stop running. Morning came quietly, the way dawn does in the country, soft and golden, slipping in through the thin curtains before I even opened my eyes. For a moment I didn't move, unsure of where I was. The faint smell of coffee, the creak of the house, the far-off sound of cattle shifting in the pasture. It all returned in gentle pieces, like remembering a dream that had been too kind to be real. Cole's side of the bed was empty. The indentation where he'd lain was still warm. I sat up slowly, the quilt slipping down to my lap. The room was filled with pale morning light, soft enough to blur the sharp edges of memory. The night before played in my head in flashes. His hand brushing mine, the quiet confession in his voice, the way silence had finally stopped feeling lonely. Now that silence had turned shy. I dressed and followed the smell of coffee down the hall. The kitchen looked different in daylight, smaller, friendlier, the wood grain glowing honey-colored. Cole stood by the stove, stirring something in a pan. He looked over when I entered, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. "Mornin', city boy," he said, easy as if nothing unusual had passed between us. I smiled back, though it felt uncertain. "Morning. Smells good. Eggs and bread. Only thing I know how to cook without setting off the smoke alarm." I chuckled, taking a seat at the table. The coffee pot steamed nearby, and when he poured me a cup, our fingers brushed. It was barely a touch, but enough to remind us both that the quiet between us wasn't quite the same as yesterday's. He sat across from me, his expression calm, almost studied. For a few minutes we just ate, the clinking of forks and the ticking of the old clock filling the room. Every so often our eyes met, then darted away like nervous birds. "You sleep all right?" he asked finally. "Yeah," I said, meaning it, "better than I have in months." "Good." He nodded, taking a slow sip of coffee. "Sometimes this place gets too quiet for rest." "Glad it didn't for you." I wanted to tell him that it wasn't the house. It was him. His steadiness, his patience, the way he made silence feel like a blanket instead of a cage. But the words felt too heavy for breakfast, so I just smiled and said, "Guess the quiet," and I finally made peace. He smiled back, small and thoughtful. "It grows on you." After we finished, Cole gathered the dishes, rinsing them under the tap. "Sun's good this morning," he said over the sound of running water. "Come on. I'll show you the place before it gets too hot." I followed him outside, boots crunching over the gravel. The world was bathed in gold. Dew glistened on the fence posts, and a soft breeze carried the scent of hay and wild sage. The horizon stretched endlessly, the kind of view that makes you feel both tiny and infinite at once. Cole led me past the barn, where the horses stood waiting, their coats catching the light. "This one's Juniper," he said, patting a brown mare's neck. "And that stubborn one over there's Arrow. He pretends he doesn't like company, but he's a liar." The horses nickered softly, pressing against his hand. He had a way with them, gentle, certain. Watching him, I realized how much of his strength came from quiet things. Consistency, care, and the ability to listen without rushing to fill space. "You ever think about leaving?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He looked at me, squinting against the morning light. "Sometimes. Usually when the roof leaks or the fence gives out and I start thinking too much about the past." He gave a small shrug. "But every time I try to picture being anywhere else, I can't. This land's got my name written in it. Somehow. I envy that," I said. "Knowing where you belong." Cole rested his hands on the fence, gazing out across the pasture where a few horses began to run, kicking up light and dust. "You'd be surprised," he said softly. "Belonging's not a place. It's the moment you stop trying to outrun yourself." I stared at the horizon, the open space that seemed to breathe around us. "Then I've still got a long road ahead." He smiled faintly. "Maybe not as long as you think." We stood there a while, watching the horses move, free, graceful, unbothered by anything beyond the next stride. Something about the sight made my chest ache, but not in a painful way. It was like seeing a version of peace I hadn't known was possible. The sunlight caught Cole's profile, softening the lines of his face. His eyes looked lighter in the morning, clearer, as if he'd left the night's heaviness behind. "I should probably check on my truck today," I said after a moment, though even as I said it, the idea felt hollow. He nodded slowly. "You could. I can help you get it running again. But there's no rush if you're not ready." "Not ready." The words hung in the air like an open door. I looked back at the house, small, worn, alive. The thought of driving away from it, from this, left an ache I didn't expect. "Maybe I'll wait till tomorrow," I said. Cole gave a quiet nod, a smile barely tugging at his lips. "Tomorrow's a good day for starting things." We walked the fence line together, not saying much. He pointed out the new calves in the distance, the patch of land he wanted to plant alfalfa on next spring, the old oak that had been standing since his grandfather's time. His voice carried the kind of love that didn't need big words to prove itself. When we circled back to the porch, he poured 2 fresh mugs of coffee and handed me one. "Here," he said. "Best view on the ranch." We sat side by side on the steps, watching the sunlight spill across the field. The air buzzed faintly with life. Insects, distant birds, the hum of a world quietly carrying on. For the first time in months, I felt still. Cole glanced over, his elbow brushing mine. "You don't talk much about yourself," he said. Not accusing, just curious. "Not much to tell," I said. "My life's been noise lately. Arguments, deadlines, trying to be someone else's version of happy." He nodded slowly. "That kind of noise gets inside you if you let it." "Yeah," I murmured. "Guess I did." He looked at me for a long moment before saying, "Maybe that truck breaking down wasn't bad luck." I met his eyes, the sunlight catching gold in them. "You think fate's got a sense of humor?" He smiled, a quiet, knowing kind of smile. "Maybe. Or maybe it just gives second chances to folks who need them." I didn't have an answer for that. Instead, I sipped my coffee and watched the horizon. The world felt wider somehow, but less intimidating. like it wasn't something to escape from anymore, but something to belong to. The horses ran again, their hooves thundering softly across the open plain. The light caught in their manes, scattering it like sparks. Cole watched them, his face thoughtful, peaceful. And I realized that maybe peace wasn't a place you found. Maybe it was a person or a moment when everything inside you stopped fighting. The sun rose higher, spilling light over everything. I felt it warm my hands, my face, the place in my chest that had been cold for too long. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in years, the idea of staying felt like moving forward. The days began to fold into each other in an easy rhythm, the kind that didn't ask to be named. One morning bled into the next, sunrises spent with steaming mugs of coffee on the porch, evenings filled with the hum of crickets and the smell of hay. What started as hesitation slowly became routine. I found myself helping with chores without being asked. Fixing a latch on the barn door, hauling feed, brushing the horses after long afternoons under the sun. Cole didn't say much about it, but every time I caught him watching me work, there was a small, proud smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're getting the hang of it," he'd tease. "Guess I'm a fast learner," I'd reply, pretending not to notice how his eyes lingered a little longer than necessary. At night, we ate simple dinners together. Beans, bread, and whatever vegetables we could pull from the small garden behind the house. Sometimes we'd talk for hours. Other times, we didn't have to talk at all. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't something to fill anymore. It was something to share. Each evening, when the light faded, we'd sit on the porch as the day cooled. He'd tell me stories about his parents, about the old days when the ranch had a dozen hands working the fields. I'd tell him about city life, the crowded streets, the noise that never stopped, the way people brushed past one another without ever really seeing. "I used to think I liked the noise," I said one night, watching the stars come out. "Made me feel less alone." He looked at me, eyes soft. "Funny how quiet can be the thing that makes you feel less lonely once you stop fighting it." That became our pattern: work, laughter, shared quiet. And somewhere in that pattern, something shifted. The space between us wasn't careful anymore. Small touches became part of the day. His hand brushing my arm as he passed a tool, the press of his shoulder against mine when we leaned on the same fence rail. Once, when I slipped in the mud while wrangling a gate, he caught me by the waist, both of us laughing like kids until the noise turned into something softer, quieter. That night, he reached over the table after dinner, fingers brushing mine for a second longer than they needed to. Neither of us said anything. We didn't have to. A week passed before I thought of the truck again. It sat where I'd left it, sun-bleached and dusty, like it belonged to another life. When I finally checked it, the repair was simple. A hose, a loose clamp, nothing that should have stopped me for long. Cole helped me fix it anyway, standing beside me with grease on his hands and a faint smile on his lips. "Well," he said, wiping his palms on a rag, "looks like she'll run fine now." I nodded, but my stomach felt hollow. The sound of the engine starting should have been relief, but instead it felt like a goodbye I didn't want to say. Cole noticed. "You don't have to leave today." "I know." He leaned against the truck, arms crossed, looking out at the horizon. "Truth is, I'll miss having someone around who doesn't talk too much." I smiled faintly. "You mean someone who doesn't argue with you?" He chuckled. "That too." Then quieter. "It's been good, having you here." The words sat between us, simple and honest. That night the air was cooler. We ate on the porch, the sky burning orange as the sun went down. The horses grazed near the fence line, and the wind carried the soft rustle of the grass. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to be said. "I should probably get going tomorrow," I said finally, though it came out more as a question than a statement. Cole didn't answer right away. He stared out at the horizon, jaw tight. "If that's what you want." I turned toward him. "Is it what you want?" He met my eyes then, and the look there, the mixture of patience, longing, and quiet fear, undid me. "I don't know," he said softly. "You came out of nowhere, Evan. Walked into this place like you'd been missing from it all along. I don't want to hold you here if you're meant to be somewhere else. But I also don't want to wake up to silence again. The words caught in my throat. I didn't realize I'd taken his hand until our fingers were already tangled. Maybe I don't have somewhere else, I said. Maybe this is it. He exhaled, something unspoken releasing with the sound. You sure? I nodded. I don't know what comes next, but for the first time, I don't feel like I have to figure it out alone. Cole smiled, small, relieved, and full of something that looked a lot like hope. Then stay, as long as you want. There's room enough for two here. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. The air between us felt like a promise. The next morning, we saddled the horses. Cole handed me Juniper's reins and adjusted the stirrup for me, his hand brushing against my leg as he did. Still remember how to ride? He asked with a grin. Guess we'll find out, I said, matching his tone. We rode side by side through the open fields, the world spread wide before us. The grass swayed golden in the sunlight, and a warm breeze carried the scent of sage and dust. Every step of the horses seemed to echo a heartbeat, slow and sure. For the first time in a long while, there was no rush to be anywhere. No deadline, no noise, just the steady rhythm of hooves and breath, and the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. When we reached the ridge overlooking the valley, Cole stopped his horse and turned to me. The sunlight caught his face, painting it in gold. Hard to believe it's only been a week, he said. Feels like longer, I replied. Or maybe just the right amount of time. He looked at me then, really looked, and there was no hesitation in his eyes. Only warmth, only peace. I smiled, letting the words come naturally. The road broke my truck, I said softly. But maybe that was the only way I'd find the one thing that wasn't broken, us. Cole's smile widened, quiet and certain. He reached over, resting his hand on mine, steady and sure. The sun began to dip behind the hills, bathing the world in amber. The horses stood still, the breeze whispering through the grass. And in that golden silence, I realized that sometimes the best journeys don't end where you planned. They end where you're finally willing to stay. Sometimes, the road that breaks you down is the one that leads you home. If you felt something in this story, that quiet hope, that second chance, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know where our stories are reaching hearts like yours.